Hey guys, so today we're doing a MaxxECU Race for a UZ VVT-i, so that's both 1 and 3 UZ VVT-i, and it's a right-hand drive setup. So let's get into it. Right, so as I said, this is going to be a MaxxECU Race model. This is for a UZ VVT-i, so it covers both the 1 and the 3 UZ VVT-i. It is a completely brand new harness, obviously our modular design as per usual. So first thing we're going to do, let's take a look at those build photos so you can see exactly what goes into making one of these. Right, so as you can see, all brand new, all modular. So you can see all the modular harness sections that we put towards the end of those photos. So again, we'll go through all of that as we do the layout. So again, we'll show you what can be connected. Obviously, we'll go through with this particular harness what is connected, but we'll also show you what the possibilities are to connect as well. All right, so again, as per usual, today we're going to be doing 3 things, which is first the layout. So we're going to go from the ECU all the way onto the engine, go through all of the little sub harnesses, how they work, how they're connected, what they can do. Then obviously we're going to go into the testing, which is the part with the ignition on, that's part 1. And then part 2 is with the engine actually running, okay? Now, obviously, there is a lot that goes into setting up an aftermarket ECU, and I obviously don't want to do a video that's like 3 hours long. So we are going to have like with the link and the Haltech and whatever, we're going to have a little section where I'm going to go through individual things, and that's going to be on a playlist that you guys can go and look at. So again, There's going to be certain things we're going to be testing, but there's also going to be a lot available in the playlist that you guys have access to, okay? Right, so let's start at the ECU end over here. So again, standard, you've got two connectors. These are completely different, okay? So you can't plug them in the wrong place. You don't have to stress about that. We then have our inbuilt map sensor connector. So that's where your pipe's going to go for your map sensor over there. We've got our USB plug over there, and we've got an aerial port over there as well. Okay. Coming out the ECU, we then have our first breakout section, which is going to be over here. And that's going to break out into 4 sections over there. What we're going to do is we're going to start with the main one, which is obviously the fuse box. So coming from here, it goes into the fuse box over there. And the fuse box has that connector, which comes from there. That connector comes in from the other side there. And then lastly, we have our customer connector over here, which we will go through all of the plugs and the wire colors and how they need to be connected as well at the end once we finish the layout, okay? Then we have our wideband oxygen sensor. Now, obviously the MaxxRace ECU, it does only have one built-in wideband sensor controller. So that's why we put it here inside the vehicle. Again, this customer has opted for a wideband sensor. So we've made a harness section that should be long enough to reach from inside of the vehicle to where the exhaust join together, okay? Now, obviously, that's not the ideal solution. If you look at the way the Bosch wants to have the sensor fitted, I think it's about 24 inches from the last cylinder. So in this case, you'd normally have obviously 2 sensors, one on each bank. But obviously because the MaxxECU Race only has 1 in, and because even if you have 1 on each bank, you're still taking an average of 4 cylinders. What we have to do is obviously run the Lambda sensor where the exhaust joins together, and we'll take an average of the 8 cylinders when we do that, okay? Now then, the next one, which I'll allude to, is the CAN. Okay, it's a 4-pin DTM connector. That is going to have both 12 volts and ground, and CAN high and CAN low. Now, we don't put a terminating resistor in there, so whatever we attach to there, if it doesn't have a built-in terminating resistor, would have to be added into that. But now that does open the possibility of adding CAN devices like dual wideband controllers. So if you did want to actually have 2 widebands on, they can most definitely be connected via CAN. So again, that's why we put that in there for you. But not only that, as you know, with CAN, it is open to a lot of things. So you can have dashes, you can have, well, the list is endless. So yeah, you can add a bunch of stuff via CAN. And this plug actually has the 12 volts and the ground built into it. So if you have a look here, you'll see I've put CAN 4-pin DTM. So pin 1 is 12 volts, ground, CAN low, and CAN high, okay? So that's everything in there you need to expand. Obviously, we don't have a cap on here. It's not needed. It's going to be inside the vehicle, so they shouldn't be exposed to any moisture or anything in there. But obviously, you can put an end cap on here, like you'll see on the harness, where the customer hasn't opted for all the options that are available on the harness, okay? Next up is going to be expansion. So again, these are the things that basically I haven't connected to the ECU that are available to use as another output if you wanted to. So in this case, we have 2 outputs there, GPO 15 and GPO 16. And obviously there's 2 drive-by-wire motor or H-bridge controllers in there, but obviously they can be used as an output as well. So again, those are there, and that is 3 and 4, which is motor 2 positive and motor 1 negative, okay? Which again, I have the whole ECU pin out for the customer where we've labeled where everything is connected to. So obviously he has that ready to use to give to the tuner if he needs to activate something or check where something is connected and make sure it's working correctly, okay? Right, so that's that section over there. Then we come through there, then we have our grommet, and as per usual, there is a bit of a CL epoxy lined heat shrink on there, ready for when he's got it fitted. He can fit this in the firewall. When he's got everything correctly in place, he can then heat shrink that down. That will then seal this outside section from the inside section to stop any water ingress coming through there, okay? Moving along from there, we then have our T-piece branch over here. So the harness is going to go that way and around the back over there. So what we're going to do first is we're going to go down the front here and we'll see what goes on there. We'll come back here and we'll go through that way over there. Okay. So the first thing that breaks out over here is going to be your ignition connector. Okay. In this case, IGNL, because again, with these engines, you're always looking at it from the driver's perspective. So this is the left bank, that is the right bank. This is going to be cylinder 1, 3, 5, and 7. Again, you can see that's labeled IGN5. So 1, 3, 5, and 7, and the other side is going to be 2, 4, 6, and 8. Okay, so that pops out there to a 6-pin DTM connector. That then goes off to the connectors. Now, obviously, this is quite useful because the one used at VVT-i has these coils. Now, it's pretty unique. I don't think of any other Toyota that has these type of coils. But the beauty of this is that effectively, because the 1 and the 3UZ are almost identical, you could actually fit the 3UZ coil. So if a couple of these coils go and you're finding it very difficult to find these coils, because the 3UZ coils are exactly the same as the IS200 coils, which are readily available obviously here in the UK, You can technically, we can make you a sub harness to fit those coils instead of these coils. So you have that option. And obviously you have the option to fit any other type of coil that you want as well. Okay, it can be the Audi R8 coils if you wanted to, etc., etc. But again, you just unplug that and then you would plug in the new one, change the settings in the ECU obviously for things like dwell time and so on. But yeah, change to whatever coils you want with that system over there, okay? Moving along the harness, which runs along there, we then have a breakout over here, which goes to our VVL, which is basically a cam sensor. Now on the 1UZ and the 3UZ VVT-Is, remember there are 3 cam sensors in total. You have one on the left bank, you have one on the right bank. So these are measuring the inlet cam. Now obviously this is for the VVT-i because again, this system only has VVT-i on the inlet cams, not on the exhaust cams. So basically this is measuring 3 teeth on this cam here. So then you can tell exactly what's happening with the cam in terms of advancing and retarding. And that's what that cam sensor over there does, okay? Moving along to here, and then down at the front here, we then have another breakout section over there, and that is going to go to your oil control valve. So again, everything is nicely labeled. So OCV, oil control valve, and that plugs directly into there, okay? Also coming out of this section over here, it's going to pop down here, and it's going to go to the front cam sensor. Again, it'll be all labeled, so you'll see cam on there as well. So the front cam sensor only measures a single tooth on the cam pulley. Again, it's not affected by the VVT, so it doesn't change depending on what the VVT-i is doing with the cam sensor. So this is the one we're going to use for synchronization for the ECU to do fully sequential injection and ignition. Okay, again, the MaxxRace ECU has 8 ignition outputs and 8 injector outputs, so we can do fully sequential ignition and injection. So cam sensor at the front, single tooth on the cam pulley there, that's what that's measuring, and that's going to help us, the ECU, determine when we need to be firing cylinder 1. Okay, then moving down from there, we then have another breakout over here, and it's just 2 sections that come out over here. The first one that pops down there is going to go to our crank sensor. So that's plugged into the bottom over there. And again, everything is labeled for you guys, so you'll be able to see it straight away. Then coming down here, we then have our 6-pin DTM for oil. Okay, now in this 6-pin DTM, we have the ability to have oil pressure, oil temperature, and just the standard oil light. Okay. In this case, the customer has opted for a Bosch combined oil pressure and temperature sensor. So that's what's connected in there. He could have also opted for just having oil pressure sensor and the oil light as well. Now, in this case, with the ECU, the oil light actually goes to the ECU itself, which again is labeled in the ECU pinout that we've made. So again, and it uses an output to activate a light, which again, you can not only do by connecting the standard oil pressure switch, but you can obviously tell the ECU to output the oil light when the pressure reaches below a certain value. So again, you're not limiting yourself by not having the oil pressure switch connected. The ECU can still output a light for the oil light on your dash based on oil pressure, which again will be measured by the pressure sensor, which is connected over here. Okay. Right, so that's that section over there. Now we're going to pop back to the back over here and move on from there. So first section that's going to pop out here is going to be our injector sub harness. Okay, so this goes underneath the sub harness and plugs in there. Down below, I have a video on how to install the injector and ACIS sub harness. So there does actually include the ACIS vacuum solenoid valve plug in there. So if you watch that video, you'll see exactly how to install that. You obviously have to have the intake off anyway to put the knock sensors and the starter solenoid plug in. So that's the time that you would then install the injector harness. Now, as you can imagine, obviously the reason we've done that is so that if you guys wanted to, you could change injectors at any particular point. So we can just literally make you a new sub harness. You could have whatever connector you wanted on there. We could change it around. And also what we've done in the past as well is the ACIS connection, or the acoustic control induction system connection, which goes to a vacuum solenoid valve. That can also actually be changed over to a Mac boost valve because they work in exactly the same way, 12 volts and a ground from the ECU. So again, if this engine was ever to go turbocharged, we could basically change it for some, Bosch injectors that are much bigger. And then obviously we could then change the ACIS valve over to a Mac boost valve as well. Obviously you do have the outputs on the expansion as well, but usually when you turbocharge it, it's not very likely that you're going to want to use the variable intake runner length. So again, that's why we've put that in there as well. So that option is available to you guys. Okay. Next up on here is our fuel connector. So again, Race has a lot of inputs and outputs. So we've had the ability to put fuel pressure and temperature in here. Obviously the customer's not opted for that. So we've just got a DTM blanking plug in there with some seals in there so it stays nice and dry. But yeah, so you can add on fuel pressure and temperature if you wanted to further down the line. Next up, coming off here is going to be our sub harness, which goes under the inlet. Okay, that is going to go to the NOx sensors and the starter solenoid. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to cut to a photo so you can see exactly what that looks like. So that is the overall picture of the setup. Then it goes down to the starter solenoid. Then it goes to knock 1. Then it goes to knock 2. Okay. Right, so in this case, the customer is running just the narrowband NOx sensors that come standard on the 1 and 3UZ VVT-i. 3UZ 5-speed VVT-i, sorry, I should add in there, the 3UZ 6-speed does come with wideband NOx sensors. But as you can see, it is an 8-pin DTM connector. We do have shielded cable, twin-core shielded cable running all the way to this connector. So on the other side, we could happily change over to Bosch wideband NOx sensors, or even fit some 3UZ 6-speed wideband NOx sensors. Again, we do sell the sub harness with that, but not only that, we sell the NOx sensors, the studs that go in the block, and the nuts to tighten them down as well. So we can sell literally a complete kit if you guys wanted to change over to wideband NOx sensors from the narrowband that comes standard on the 1 and 3UZ VVT-i. Okay. Next up is the earth. So that just comes down to there. There's an M6 bolt there, so a 10mm socket takes that off. Your standard 1 and 3UZ VVT-i harnesses use this point. Well, the 1UZ used this point down here, which is an M8. The 3UZ used this one, which is an M6. So in this case, the customer is going to grab an M6 bolt to put in here to earth this out. He's not going to be using that one down there or that one down there. Okay, but I would say that these engines do love earth, so it's not going to hurt him at all if he puts an earthing point either from here or the other side over there to the firewall of the vehicle as well, just to give him an extra earth. So remember, your earths, you're going to have your main one, which comes down to your block, which you can see in my case runs from the negative of the battery all the way to the block. Then you can take one from here to the firewall, and then on Toyota, they usually put a grounding strap from one of the gearbox bolts to the chassis leg. So again, you can do that as well and replicate exactly what Toyota did. It's not going to hurt it. These things do love earths, so feel free to knock yourself out in terms of that. But those three should get you exactly where you need to be, okay? And as you can see here, I have used a P-clamp just to hold it down over here. Now, this is a 3UZ water bridge, or 1UZ one is slightly different, but you still have mounting points there because they had the piece of plastic that ran along the back here that had the mounting points on there, so you should be able to find access to mounting points there, okay? Right, let's move along to the other side now, so we can start from there. So again, the harness just runs along there like that. Again, I'm using another P-clamp over here to hold it on to the water bridge, just to keep it all nice and tidy. And out of here, we have a couple of sections that break out. So let's start off with, we have ignition right. So again, you can actually see it over there, IG and R. So again, exactly the same as the other side. It's just going to the 4 coils. And again, if you want to change it, you can just unplug this. We can make another harness with a different connector on, and you can swap the coils around. No problem whatsoever. Next up from here is we do actually have a map sensor plug, okay? So what we've done is we've had the ability that an external map sensor can be fitted onto the vehicle. So if you don't want to run one from the ECU all the way down, obviously that can be added on there. Now, as you can imagine, a map has 5 volts sensor ground and a signal in. So again, this doesn't necessarily have to be utilized for a map. If you have something else that needs a 0 to 5 volt signal, it can happily be connected to this, no problems whatsoever. So again, if you're not using this, you can just bring it forward here and you can tuck it away nice and neatly so it doesn't dangle down near the exhaust over there, okay? Then what we do have here is our accelerator pedal connector. Again, I'm just going to go over there. So there's pedal over there for you. Right, so remember, both the 1UZ and the 3UZ VVT-i are both drive-by-wire. Okay, so even though the 1UZ VVT-i throttle body has physically an accelerator cable that mounts onto here, this is actually just an accelerator position sensor, which is effectively the same as a drive-by-wire pedal. There's no difference whatsoever. It's just measuring a 0 to 5 volt signal. There's 2 signals in here, a main and a sub, so obviously it can check itself for safety reasons, and that's what that plug over there is, okay? So in this case, the customer's not going to be using this one with an accelerator cable. He is actually going to be using an electronic drive-by-wire pedal. So again, we've made this pedal over here. In this case, it's going to go straight through there into the interior and plug into his accelerator pedal, which is going to go inside the vehicle. So that's how he's going to be controlling the drive-by-wire on this particular setup. Now, obviously, the reason the plug comes out here is that if a customer wanted to use this one and stay with the standard setup, we would just make a plug from there to there, and it would just run along here and then plug directly into there. So again, super straightforward, nothing too complicated there. And again, you can fit whatever pedal you want because it is an aftermarket ECU, so you set up the pedal yourself. You calibrate the signals and do all of that yourself. So again, you're not limited. You don't have to stick to a Toyota pedal. You can use whatever pedal you want with an aftermarket ECU, okay? Right, moving along, we then come to the middle over here, and exactly like the other side, we have a breakout for our VVR, so the cam sensor for the right inlet cam, okay? So again, this one and the one on the left are gonna be measuring the cam. So it's going to be measuring what the VVT-i is doing. So again, you're using the oil control valve to advance and retard the cam. And what this is going to do is it's going to check and see. So if the ECU commands 20 degrees of retard on the cam, this will measure it and go, yes, I'm getting that. Fantastic. Everything is gravy. Okay. Then moving along, we're going to break out at the front here. So we've got quite a few sections here. So let's start off with the big one that you can see here. And that is going to be our throttle. Okay. So again, we've made this universal, so it'll work both with a 1UZ and a 3UZ VVT-i. So because the 1UZ VVT-i is a clutched drive-by-wire system, that's why we have the 8-pin connector rather than the 6-pin that you normally see on our 3UZ harnesses, okay? So in order for this to work both with this throttle and the 3UZ throttle, we have to add a 12 volts and a ground to activate the clutch so that this does work. So that's why we've gone from 6 to 8 pin connector over here. Now then, moving on to the throttle over here, what I'm going to tell you about this is basically there is a difference from the standard setup that we've done. So in other words, this runs and it's quite happy to run along here where the original harness would have mounted to. But the change comes on the other side, okay? So again, we have our drive-by-wire motor plug. So this is where the clutch is connected plus the positive and negative of the drive-by-wire motor. Now, usually on the standard harness, you have this plug over here, and that normally goes down to your TPS connector. So I'm going to see if I can get that to come up over there. There you go. So again, it's a little sub harness that Toyota put on, and that then plugs into the TPS sensor down there. Now, because this can unplug from the harness, basically what we've done is we've taken this one and we're literally going straight into the TPS connector there. So there's your connector there, go straight into the TPS. Because if you needed to remove this harness, the throttle body itself, you could just undo the 4 bolts, unplug it there, and then pull it off with its harness and everything still attached. Take it out, and then when you put it back in again, you just plug it straight in over there. So again, it's not, you know, it's not major, but obviously we're just trying to remove as many things over there. So you can remove this entire gray plug and everything from your throttle, put it to one side, leave it for later. So again, when you got the intake and everything off, you can have all this apart, probably cleaning your throttle out because that's always a good idea to do. When that's done, you can then fit this harness, go from there, mount it down there, and have it ready to plug into your main harness when you put the throttle back on again. Okay. Right, so that's the throttle section over there. Next up is going to be your coolant temperature sensor. So that's going to go to the standard coolant temperature sensor that goes down into there. Okay. Now, in this case, we also have a temp wire. Okay, so this is so you can fit your own temperature sensor in there. Okay, so for example, in this particular case, the customer's putting in an IS200. Now, because he wants obviously his gauges to work, we are supplying him with an MPX device. And I'll show you on the inside of the vehicle where that temperature is coming out. It's on that 6-pin plug over there. So in this case, he could do what I've done here, and he could fit a 1UZ non-VVT-i sensor directly there where you can see my one is. Normally on a 1UZ and a 3UZ VVT-i, there'll be a blanking bolt in there. You can take that out, and a 1UZ non-VVT-i sensor will fit directly in its place. And obviously we've left plenty of extra wire on there to put a terminal and a connector on for whichever sensor that you need to use. To get a temperature out on the other side inside the vehicle to either run to your dash or aftermarket temperature gauge or whatever you're going to be running there. Okay. Right, then next up, we've got, again, our oil control valve for the right bank. So again, labeled OCV. These are all different connectors anyway, so you can't mix them up. And then we have our intake air temperature sensor, IAT. So that is coming down there, and the customer is using a Bosch intake air temperature sensor. So again, that is all there. Plenty of length over there. He can run it obviously wherever he likes in there. I think the closest to the throttle that you can get is obviously the better because you're getting a more accurate measurement. But that is a fast response air sensor, so you'll see the element is actually exposed. So again, that'll give incredibly accurate readings, and it'll be very, very quick to change if the temperature does change. Okay. Then lastly, coming down over here, we're going to follow down here. And then we have our alternator connector, okay? So again, we put this on a sub harness because in this case, yes, it's gonna be the 3-pin oval connector, which you find on the, not only the 1UZ VVT-i, but also on the 3UZ VVT-i, and also on the later generations of the 1UZ non-VVT-i, all have the same connector, so that's great. But if you wanted to, and you couldn't get hold of one of those, the 3UZ 6 speeds that come with the 4-pin connector, obviously we could make him a connector for that, and that could just unplug that, plug in that one. Or if you wanted to run another alternator altogether, we could also make the connection from there, and then that could control another alternator if you wanted to. Okay. Right, so that is the entire layout of the harness. That's where everything goes. So again, that should be really nice, simple, and straightforward. For things like the injector harness and so on, like I said, I've got videos linked down below to show you exactly how to install those, because obviously that's all with the intake off, so you can't see how it's physically installed now from the top. But yeah, videos on how to install all of that stuff, really, really simple and straightforward, nothing too complicated there. Okay. So as I said, let's move over to the plugs over here. I've already gone through the CAN and the expansion one, so I've gone through those two over there. It's only 4-pin connectors, very, very simple to go through. So let's go through this 9-pin connector plug over here. Right, so you'll notice I've got a red and a gray one already out there, and that'll become very obvious in a section because pin 1 is red, which is that one over there, and that is your permanent 12-volt supply, okay? Now, it's kind of just a leftover from our standard management harnesses. You don't technically need to take that to a permanent 12-volt supply. With aftermarket ECUs, they don't all need a permanent supply to keep their memory like the standard ECUs do. But obviously, it is possible to connect it to a permanent 12-volt supply. You don't have to connect it only to an ignition one. But again, in this particular case, you can actually connect it. Okay. All right. Then number 2 is going to be black with a yellow. So there's our black with a yellow wire there. All right. Now that is your start signal, okay? Now then, this particular case, like with most of our aftermarket ECUs, it's actually the ECU that's controlling the starter. It's not you turning the key or pressing the button, okay? So in this case, this wire can be fed either with the 12 volts, which is obviously the most common in most vehicles if you're using a key barrel to do it, or it can be fed with the ground, okay? Whichever setup you go with, you do need to obviously change settings in the ECU itself. It leaves here with me ready to be given a 12 volts signal. Okay, so if that changes, you just need to change the settings in the ECU, and obviously that's starter motor control. So again, what I should have, or I will do, is a video in our MaxxECU playlist on how the starter motor control works. So again, we'll go through that in there. I'm not going to go through in detail here. All right, but obviously the most important part is that you're not controlling the starter motor. Basically, you give the signal, the ECU takes over, it cranks the starter motor until either a time has passed or the engine actually starts over, okay? Right, number 3 is yellow with a green. So again, this is our temp wire. So this is where that temp wire from the engine harness comes out. So again, this can be taken to an aftermarket coolant temperature gauge. It can be taken to your dash. It can be taken anywhere you want, basically, to get a coolant temperature sensor. If you're not using like a CAN dash, then obviously all of the data will come from the ECU. So this is like sort of more analog if you need to have an analog signal there. Okay. Number 4 is fuel pump. Okay, so this can be taken directly to the positive side of the fuel pump. It is fused in the fuse box. It has its own relay, and it is controlled by the ECU. So obviously you set it all up. It'll come on when the engine is actually on and rotating. Obviously it will prime because you can set that up on the ECU. You can turn it off if you want as well. You don't have to have it, but again, all controlled by the ECU. If you want to have a thicker wire because you've got a much bigger pump, then you're quite happy to take that gray wire to a relay that's in the boot by the fuel tank. And obviously you can feed a thicker gauge wire to that relay, and from that relay directly to the fuel pump. And then that's going to give out a 12 volt signal. So just remember when you're connecting a relay up, how exactly you want to use that. And again, if you have 2 fuel pumps, you can use your expansion harness over here, and you can use one of the GPO outputs, and you can take that to another relay. So you could technically run 2 fuel pumps if you wanted to as well. Again, not a major issue. And if you wanted to leave that gray one at all, you can basically take those 2 outputs over there and run it to there. So again, there's many ways to skin a cat. I'm just trying to give you examples of exactly what you can do. Okay. Number 5 is yellow with a red. So that's our red with a yellow. And that is going to be our check engine light, okay? So that is going to give out a ground for a check engine light. So in this case, when we do the testing, it's going to cause the check engine light on the actual dash to come on. So I'm just using this for testing purposes. We also fit an LED into the fuse box. So again, it's if you guys haven't had time to connect all of this up inside your vehicle, when you turn the ignition on, that will come on. So you can actually see that the ECU is alive, active, and it's putting out a check engine light. So you don't have to wait until everything else is wired up to see that information, okay? Obviously, once the lid is on, you won't see the LED, so it's not gonna be constantly annoying you in the corner of your eye or something like that. So you do cover it up. It's more just for if you haven't connected everything up inside the vehicle. Right, next up is number 6, which is going to be a solid yellow. and that is going to be your tacho signal. Okay, so that's going to output a tacho signal. That tacho signal is coming from the ECU. Okay, so again, it is controlled by the ECU. You can adjust it for whether you have a four-cylinder RPM gauge or a 6-cylinder or an 8-cylinder RPM gauge, all adjustable inside the ECU itself, okay, to get it correct. Then number 7 is going to be black with a red tracer, all right, and that is going to be your ignition feed. So as I said, the thick red wire over there is actually supplying power to the fuse box, but you turn everything on by supplying this black with a red with 12 volts, okay? As you can see, it's a very thin wire. It's not actually doing any work in terms of supplying anything. It's not supplying the starter motor. It's not supplying the fuel pump. It's not supplying injection coils. It's not supplying anything. This is purely triggering the relays, and the red thick cable, that's the one that's actually supplying all the power to everything, okay? Right, then next up we've got 8, which is pink with a blue. There's pink with a blue. Okay, that is your alternator light. So again, as per usual with all of our harnesses, we have that wire in there. That's going to give a ground to activate an alternator light on either on your dash or an LED you fit in your dash if you're making your own complete dash. But yeah, that will give out a ground to power that. Now then, there is one caveat with these, and I've only seen it on older vehicles, but if your dash or cluster or whatever uses an incandescent bulb, so in other words, an old-fashioned type bulb, not an LED. There can be situations with older vehicles where the 12 volts, which is supplied to the other side of the light bulb from the dash, can actually feed back into the alternator and feed back through there. Because remember, the alternator has a permanent 12 volt supply, an ignition 12 volt supply, and the light. So those are the 3 connections on there. So I have seen in the past where the 12 volts from the inside the vehicle can feed back into it and actually keep the whole system alive. So you turn the key off, but everything stays alive because obviously it's feeding 12 volts back into the ignition system, which effectively means you'd get 12 volts coming out of this black with a red wire. So if you have an older vehicle, 2 options. One, you can either change the bulb for an LED because that's a diode, so it will not allow backfeed into it, or you can fit a diode into the system just to stop it, okay? So again, you don't need to do this, but if you are fitting a harness like this into an older vehicle and you get everything wired up and you get it all started up and then you find when you turn the key off, it stays running and stays on, then that is more than likely your problem. So then you can go and fit a diode in there or change your bulb to an LED. Obviously, if you're doing your own dash, just grab an LED charge light for your dash and then it solves all your problems in one go, okay? But remember, that's a ground, it's not a 12 volts that's coming out there. Right, then lastly, number 9 is going to be yellow with a black. So that's this one over here, yellow with a black, okay? And that is the oil light. So as I said, when you look at our oil connector here, we do have everything from oil pressure, oil temperature, and we do have the connection for a standard oil pressure switch. So it's an on-off switch that comes standard on the 1 and 3UZ VVT-Is, 1UZ non-VVT-I, 2JZ GE VVT-I, 2JZ GE VVT-I. They all come with just an oil pressure switch that basically turns on and off. Now, if you'd connected that on there, then obviously that would feed back into the ECU on a digital input, which you could then tell the ECU to output a ground via this wire over here, okay? So this wire over here is not actually connected to that connector over there. It is actually connected to the ECU on an output. Obviously, we've got loads of outputs. We had the ability to do that. So, and the reason I've done that is obviously if you're not using an oil pressure switch, but you are using an oil pressure sensor, like in this case, you can quite happily set the output for the oil light to be based on oil pressure that you are measuring with your sensor. So you don't lose the ability for an oil light. If you have an oil pressure sensor, you just have the ability to actually get it to come on when you want it to come on, okay? Not when the oil pressure switch decides to come on. You can actually change that and you can tell it when to come on, okay? Right, so that is the 9-pin plug over there. That's basically what you're gonna be connecting inside your vehicle. Now, apart from that, on your engine itself, I've already been through all the earths that obviously you need to connect in. You're also gonna have your main starter cable. So again, this little section harness that goes in there comes standard on every single engine. So you'll have your main cable there, which goes directly to the positive of your battery. If not, obviously you can make one. And then lastly, in terms of positives, you are then going to need your alternator. So that just bolts directly onto there, nice and simple. All right. Now, obviously on a standard Toyota, the way that they ran the alternator power was they actually ran it to a fuse, 120 amp fuse, 130 amp fuse. Obviously depends on your alternator that you've sized up over there. Now, that's what I always advise people to do. especially in a vehicle, because these alternator cables do have a long run. They normally go underneath the engine. So again, if I come over to here, for example, on an IS200, the alternator would be sitting here. The fuse box has already got it built in to actually mount the alternator main power supply there, and there's your 120 amp fuse. So again, that long run that's going to run across there all the way under the along the subframe and up to the alternator there's a lot of areas for that to actually get caught, break off, and so on. If that happens and you've connected the alternator directly to the positive of your battery, well, guess what? There's nothing stopping that cable from superheating, catching on fire, and you not having a really fun time. So as I said, I always advise people, even if it's just a normal old car, like an old Volvo or something like that, go and get yourself a MIDI fuse and basically put it as close to the battery as humanly possible and take it from alternator to there, and then from there to the battery positive. Obviously, some older vehicles you might find where they've taken basically the alternator to the starter motor and then to the battery. That's not really going to be possible in this case because the starter motor lives underneath the intake, so that really can't be done. But yeah, I always advise guys, please put a fuse in there. It's better to be safe than sorry. They're not super expensive. So if you don't have the ability, like on an IS200 or 300 or Tesla, where you've already got the post in that there, again, your vehicle might have the post already. Okay, if it does, use that post and just change the fuse to match your alternator. So again, like I said, the IS200, 300s, they have 120 amp fuse, which is probably what I would go through for this particular engine on a 1UZ VVT-i, because I think they have the exact same one. But if you are fitting a higher output alternator, then obviously the 120 might become 130, might become 140, might become 150. It's up to you guys on what you fit inside there. Okay, right. So that's pretty much it, guys. Again, super simple and straightforward. Obviously, this is a right-hand drive model. We do make it in the left-hand drive as well if you guys want. But yeah, hopefully that's super helpful for you guys. You can see where everything goes. And again, an explanation of all the modular outputs so you can see exactly what this harness is capable of. Because again, the reason we've done this is so that you guys don't have to keep changing your harness as you upgrade or change your engine over time. You can change injectors, you can change coils, you can change throttles, you can change accelerator pedals, you can add fuel pressure and temp sensors, you can add a map sensor, you can add another sensor if you want. So again, it's limitless. You guys can add in a bunch of stuff. The only things that we've kept on here is stuff that you cannot change, like for example, this oil control valve that can't be changed, so we've kept the standard connector on there. Crank sensor, I can never see a reason to want to change that, so again, that is the standard Toyota connector on there. But again, we've only kept the standard connectors on stuff that you basically would never change on the harness. Everything else is be able to be unplugged and changed for something else. Okay. Right, so I'm going to pop off quickly. I'm going to come back and then we're going to go through the testing of the harness. So, see you in a second. Right guys, now we're back for the testing of the engine harness, and as usual it's made up of two sections, one with the ignition on and one with the engine actually running. Now what you'll notice when I go through what we're going to test, you're going to see it is quite short testing. Now with the aftermarket ECUs there is quite a lot of off-camera testing that we do, obviously all the injector inputs, all the coil outputs, sensors, even sensors that are not used. So in this example would be the fuel at the back is obviously not being used by the customer, but we still obviously test all of that, and I have my little test harness over there which gives me a 0 to 5 volt signal, a temperature signal, and that will obviously give me my oil pressure switch. Okay, so again, there's a lot of testing off camera, but obviously it's already usually up to like 30-40 minutes just with the layout, so I don't want to add another 40-50 minutes onto a video. Obviously it is a bit to watch everything. Layout is the most important, so you guys are going to plug everything in. But we do have a MaxxECU playlist where I'm going to show you guys with screen grabs on the software to show you what to do. And obviously I'll cut to some sections where I'll actually show you on the harness how you'd carry out that testing. So we're going to go through things like loading a base map, downloading the software, how to update the firmware, how to test your inputs and outputs. We go through a whole bunch on there. So again, that playlist is very good. It's smaller bite-sized chunks that you guys can watch, not too long videos that'll show you exactly how to test everything on the harness. So without further ado, let's go through what we are going to be testing today, and then we'll jump into the testing with the ignition on. So first of all is the check engine light. So as I said earlier, check engine light is both in the fuse box via that LED, and it's going to be on the cluster as well. So what I'm going to do is, once I put the ignition on, you're going to see that the check engine light there and in the fuse box is going to turn on. I'm going to use the software to test the output, and what it does nicely for me is it turns it on, which it'll already be on, but it also then turns it off before turning it back on again. So I should see the check engine light on the cluster and the fuse box go out for a second, then come back on again. So I know that all the wiring is correct, because obviously I've connected the check engine light up there and the LED is working the same way. Next up is going to be charge light. So what I'm going to do for that is I've got an LED over here. This device over here works the alternator light on the cluster automatically. So once it drops below a certain voltage, it will activate the alternator light. So to make it easy for us, I'm going to hook this LED up to my pink with the blue wire. As soon as I put the ignition on, that's going to light up. I'm going to go over to the engine. I'm going to unplug the alternator, the DTM connector. That light's going to go off, and then I'm going to replug it back in again, and it's going to come on. So I know 100% that that is the alternator light wire, as it should be. Next up is going to be oil pressure. So what I'm going to do in this case is, as I said earlier, all the signals from that 6-pin DTM plug are actually going to the ECU. So you have both oil pressure and temperature. You also have a digital input for oil pressure if you're just using the switch. Obviously, this customer is using an oil pressure, temperature, and pressure sensor from Bosch, a combined one. But most importantly, we're using an output from the ECU to come to the fuse box to put out an oil light. So in this case, the customer, what he would basically do is set up the output and use the oil pressure reading in order to activate the output. So he could say that if the oil pressure drops below a certain pressure, the oil light will activate. For my purposes now, for the testing side, all I'm going to do is effectively, I've taken my oil light, which is my yellow with a black wire there. I fed it into there. If I test the output, I should see the oil pressure light come on the dash, and therefore I know the wiring from the ECU to the fuse box to the cluster is 100% correct. All right. Fuel pump relay. Again, super simple. When I actually turn the ignition on, you're going to hear the fuel pump prime, because it does prime for about 3 seconds. Again, you can set that up inside the ECU. If you go through all of our sections about setting up inputs and outputs, I go through that in there for you guys. But again, once the engine's on, the prime is over, I'm actually going to go and I'm going to test the fuel pump output on the ECU, and it'll turn on the relay, turn on the fuel pump, and obviously turn it off again. Okay. So that's basically all we're going to do with the ignition on. As I said, it's a lot of stuff is just sort of like inside the vehicle, like check engine light, charge light, oil pressure light, because again, to go through every single thing, like to test every single injector, would make this video like, 40 minutes long, plus another 40 minutes for the layout. It's a very long video, so I do apologize. But like I said, in that playlist on MaxxECU, I'll go through everything in there, but it's in much easier, smaller chunks that you guys can watch, and you can go straight to a particular section that you need to. You don't have to go through a whole video to try and find what you're looking for. Right, with the engine running, the starter circuit. So as I said, in this case, the ECU is controlling the starter. So all I'm going to basically do is I'm going to touch the black with the yellow wire, which is set up to receive at 12 volts. Because as I said, I set it up like that because that's how most people are going to have it working. I'm going to touch to the 12 volts where the ignition is. ECU is going to take over. It's then going to crank the starter over until the engine goes above 300 RPM or a time limit, in this case, 4 seconds. Again, starter motor control will be in the MaxxECU playlist under one of the smaller videos, which will be a much shorter video for you to watch. ACIS, or acoustic control induction system. First of all, I do have a video linked down below in the description. Explains exactly what ACIS is, how it works, and what it does. But all we're looking for at the moment is once I put the ignition on, this valve should go from this position, so I can get it to focus, that position to that position. Okay. Obviously, the ACIS system by Toyota is quite complex in how it works. So effectively, from 0 to 2,500 RPM, it's only on if throttle position, not pedal position, throttle position is below 60%. Between 2,500 and 4,900 RPM, it's active no matter what the throttle position is. And then from 4,900 to the red line, it's only active if the throttle is below 60%. So in this case, because we have a limited amount of functions that we can put to a customized output, once I put the ignition on, the output is going to go active because it's going to detect 0 RPM and it's going to detect that the ACIS is below 60%. Okay. What I might be able to do is press the accelerator all the way down and it might deactivate. I'll see if I can do that for you guys as part of the testing on there. Drive-by-wire, again, super simple. Basically, we're just going to literally be pressing the pedal down. The engine's going to rev up. We know everything is working. And as I said, you can see we've got no accelerator cable there. Fully drive-by-wire. Going to be using the accelerator pedal to do that. Tacho. Nice and simple. You'll actually see when I put the ignition on, if you can see in the camera, you'll see that does a sweep as part of the ECU. A lot of aftermarket ECUs do that. So again, you'll see that, you know it's working, but once we start the engine, we'll actually sit at the RPM that is working there. On the MaxxECU, we just set it up as, in this particular case, as a 6-cylinder output, because this is IS200 cluster, so it's looking for a 6-cylinder output. Coolant temp. Now, we're not looking for the coolant temp on the ECU. You can clearly see that's working on the live data at the bottom. What I am testing though is I'm testing this output over here because that's something that we add in separately. So again, this is going to my 1UZ non-VVT-i coolant temperature sensor. It's plugged into the wire there labeled as temp. That's coming out on this yellow with the green wire here to my device here. So I should see some coolant temperature on the dash, okay? We're not looking for accuracy. This device is completely adjustable, so I can make it read halfway when it's only 50 degrees. So not accuracy, we just want to make sure that it is actually going up and down, okay? And then lastly, diagnostics. Well, basically, we just want to see if we've got no error codes on there. And I'll go through the ECU. You'll actually see how to do the diagnostics. There's a diagnostics sub-menu where you could look at error codes, and there's a really nice help section that you guys can look at. And if you have error codes, you can go to the help section, and it'll tell you exactly where to look for information to rectify your issue, okay? Right, so that's it for the testing side. So let's jump in with the ignition on testing. So hopefully I'm going to be able to do this single-handedly. I'm going to try and see if I can get the dash in as well. Oh, there you go. So hopefully you saw the sweep on the dash there, so that's perfect. We've got the check engine light on there and on the fuse box as well, so that's great. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to jump into testing the check engine light. I'm going to see if I can bring you over here so you can see. Obviously I've set up all the outputs on there, but there is the check engine light. So I'm just going to press it and you should see the check engine light go off. There you go, it flickered. And on the fuse box, there it flickers on there, perfect. Okay, so super happy with that. Check engine light is working as it should. Oil pressure, you can see at the moment we've got absolutely nothing on there. And we're gonna go over to oil light over here that I've set up. Let's go over to the dash, and there you'll see the oil light come on and off. Perfect, so I'm super happy with that. So that means the oil light output from the ECU is going into the fuse box and it's coming out to there and obviously communicating it to there. If you didn't have this set up, obviously you just take that yellow with the black to an LED and it would work the same. Okay, right, so next up is going to be charge light. So again, we've got our LED over there, so you can see it is nicely lit up. So what I am going to do is I'm going to unplug the alternator. We're going to pop back over here and you can see there, LED has gone out. I'm going to pop back over here. Plug that in. And there's our LED back, and that's obviously connected to our pink with the blue wire, which as we know is the alternator light, okay? Fuel pump relay, hopefully you heard it when I did actually put the ignition on. You could hear the fuel pump prime. But again, same as the other ones. We're just going to go to our fuel pump relay output, which is right there, and I'm going to keep quiet. There you go, you can hear the relay clicking away. So again, super happy. ECU is controlling the fuel pump. The relay's already in this. You can hear the relay click and you can hear the fuel pump come on as well. Okay, right, so that's basically it. As you can see, I've already got some coolant temperature on there as well. So I'm going to pop back in a second and we're going to do the testing with the engine running. So see you in a second. Right guys, so we're back now. We're going to do the testing of the engine with it running. So that's what we're going to do next. So I'm just going to do a quick recap of what we're going to be doing. So looking at our list, our starter circuits, remember the ECU is controlling the starter circuit. So again, I'm just going to touch this black with the yellow wire on the 12 volts, and then you're going to see the ECU is going to take over, kick it over and start it. The ACIS, because of the way we're controlling it at the moment, you can see it's in the upright position, but what we're going to do is as soon as I put the ignition on, that'll actually close, because again, the way we set it up on there, it's not going to only close when we start a few seconds after we start the engine, so we'll check that. Drive-by-wire test, well, that's simple enough. We're just going to press the accelerator pedal down, and that's going to rev the engine. Tacho, we're going to come back and we're going to take a look at our tachometer and make sure that it's working correctly, so that's going to be great. And then lastly, diagnostics. We're just going to go into the diagnostics section of the ECU software, and you'll see we've got no codes or anything there to go with it. Okay, so what I'm going to quickly do now is put the ignition on. Okay, let's get that in there. Fantastic. Put my ear defenders on. Over there, so the ACIS, you can see that's gone down, so that is great. Drive-by-wire test. Again, that's perfect. Tacho, you can see we've got tacho. Perfect. And then we're going to go to coolant temp. You can see it is above there. You can see our coolant is about 80 degrees, so that's absolutely perfect on there. Right, so let's just kill the fuel pump. yeah, it takes a bit of while to run out of the fuel in the fuel rails over there. But yeah, that's perfect. You can also see when we're running the engine, we didn't get any check engine light up on the dash or anything like that, so that's perfect. And then obviously looking down here under diagnostics, error codes, we've got absolutely no error codes on the ECU as well. Now, just a quick note, guys, obviously this is, I've set the ECU up in such a way that obviously the customer, when he gets it on his side, can run the engine, get the vehicle up to temperature, check that his fans are working, check that he's got no leaks. You can check his oil pressure, you can check his fuel pressure, you can check all of that stuff before he goes off to the actual tuner. But if you looked at my other videos, you will know that I stress not to spend too much time trying to get the car to run perfectly before you go to the tuner, because whatever you do now before it goes to the tuner is going to be completely overwritten and useless once it goes to the tuner, because any changes you make are going to relate to the volumetric efficiency table and ignition table and AFR table that your tuner sets up. If you use what we send out to you, obviously that's all going to be wrong. It's just the base map we usually get from a couple of different vendors. We get the engine to run exactly like you see here. We make sure everything is okay. We make sure all the injectors are firing, coils are firing, engine's running sweet as you can hear. And that'll be good enough for you guys on your side to get it up to temperature, get everything tested out before you go to the dyno, because you don't want to be wasting time on the dyno fixing problems, okay? But that's it, guys. So thanks for watching. If you've got any questions, please feel free to ask down below. You can also find us on Facebook at Phoenix Engine Management, or obviously email us info@phoenixenginemanagement.com. But thanks for watching, guys. See you again soon. Bye-bye.